All stories are dramatized recreations. Named locations are fictionalized. Any resemblance to real persons is coincidental.
Hi, I'm Amelia, a 37-year-old mortgage processor from North Carolina. Sharing this is hard, but I need to process how my husband David's affair with a female coworker from a company conference shattered our 11-year marriage. It began not with a loud bang, but with a quiet, almost imperceptible shift. A new password on his phone, a sudden interest in a conference he'd usually complain about, a lingering scent of hotel laundry soap on his suit jacket that felt out of place. I was balancing spreadsheets and loan applications, thinking our biggest problem was the interest rate, while our entire foundation was turning to sand. I noticed the way he'd smile at a notification, quickly tilting the screen away. It was in the calculated distance during dinner, the stories from the trip that felt too polished, rehearsed. The truth wasn't found in a single moment. It was a mosaic of 100 tiny, fractured details I spent nights piecing together, each one cutting deeper than the last. The first crack appeared not in a dramatic confrontation, but on a perfectly ordinary Tuesday. It was the week after David returned from the annual regional conference in Charlotte, a trip he'd moaned about for days, complaining about the generic hotel, the predictable presentations, the rubber chicken dinners. Yet, he came back different. Not happier, not lighter, but preoccupied. His mind was 1,000 miles away, still in some conference room or hotel bar, and I could feel the distance in our living room like a physical chill. It was his shirt. I was doing the laundry, the mindless, automatic ritual of our married life. Sorting whites and colors, his dress shirts from his weekend tees. I pulled his favorite pale blue shirt from the hamper, the one I'd bought him for our anniversary, and something made me pause. I held it to my face, inhaling the familiar scent of his detergent and his skin, but there was something else. A faint, cloying sweetness beneath the clean cotton. A perfume. Not mine. My scent is simple, vanilla and sandalwood. This was something artificial, fruity, and floral, like overripe strawberries and cheap champagne. It was the kind of scent a younger woman might wear, something bold and trying too hard. My stomach tightened into a cold, hard knot. I told myself I was being ridiculous. Maybe it was from a receptionist at the conference, a casual brush in a crowded elevator. But the explanation felt as thin and flimsy as tissue paper. I found the receipt later that evening, while looking for a pen in the worn leather messenger bag he'd taken on the trip. It was crumpled at the bottom, tucked behind a pad of conference notes. Not a receipt for a dinner or a hotel charge. It was from a quaint little coffee shop in Charlotte called The Daily Grind, dated the second day of the conference. For 2 coffees, 1 black coffee that was David's, and 1 vanilla latte with an extra shot, and 2 slices of lemon loaf. David doesn't like lemon loaf. He thinks it's too tart. I love it. He always buys me a slice when we go to our place downtown. He always teases me about my predictable choice. Another lemon loaf, Amelia? Live a little. The memory of his voice, warm and fond, echoed in my head and now felt like a mockery. He was there, in a city 2 hours away, buying lemon loaf for someone else. The intimacy of it stole my breath. This wasn't a business meeting. Business meetings don't involve sharing pastries at a cute, out-of-the-way cafe. This was a date, a quiet, stolen moment in the middle of his day. I stood there in our home office, the crumpled piece of thermal paper burning in my hand. The numbers on the page. The time, 3:10 p.m., not a lunch meeting, a mid-afternoon escape, swam before my eyes. I could see it all with a horrifying, crystalline clarity. Their laughter over the coffee cups. The way she might have taken a sip of his black coffee and made a face. The casual brush of fingers over the shared plate. The entire pathetic tableau played out in my mind, and I felt like a ghost in my own life, watching a scene I was never meant to see. The foundation of our 11 years. The laundry, the shared jokes about lemon loaf, the quiet comfort of our routines suddenly felt like a stage set, flimsy and fake. And I was the only one who didn't know the performance had already ended. The receipt became a live wire, searing my palm. I didn't confront him. Not then. A strange, cold calm settled over me, the kind that descends when the worst thing you imagined is confirmed to be not just a phantom of your insecurity, but a tangible, receipt-sized reality. I carefully smoothed out the paper on his desk, took a picture of it with my phone, the evidence feeling both crucial and absurd, and placed it back exactly where I found it. The rest of the evening was a masterclass in performative normality. I made meatloaf, his favorite. I asked about his day, listened to his mundane stories about office politics with a smile that felt painted on. I was an actor in a play where the script had been shredded, but the audience him was still watching, expecting the usual show. My new obsession became his phone. It was no longer just a device. It was a vault, a portal to the truth. He was more protective of it than ever, placing it face down always, angling his body away when he typed. The casual, open trust we had, where we'd hand each other our phones to look up a recipe or change the music, was gone, replaced by this guarded, secretive dance. The password had been our anniversary for a decade. I picked it up one night as he snored softly beside me, his back to me. The screen lit up, demanding a passcode. I typed in the numbers that had once symbolized our beginning. Incorrect. A cold dread washed over me. I tried his birthday. Incorrect. My birthday. My birthday. Incorrect. My hands were shaking. The glow of the screen was the only light in the room, illuminating my failure to access my own husband's life. I looked at him, at the familiar slope of his shoulders, and felt like I was lying next to a stranger. Who was he protecting? What was he hiding? The perfume, the receipt, they were one thing. But changing the password felt like a definitive act of severance. It was a lock on a door that had always been open, and he had deliberately turned the key, shutting me out. I spent the rest of the night staring at the ceiling, each tick of the clock echoing the question, what was on that phone that was worth this? The logical part of my brain, the mortgage processor who dealt in facts and figures, started compiling a mental dossier. The change in behavior post-conference. The new password. The physical evidence. It was a trail, and it led straight to a conclusion I was still desperately trying to avoid. The next morning, I was a ghost. I moved through the routine on autopilot, brewing coffee, packing lunches, but my mind was elsewhere, trapped in the digital labyrinth of his phone. He was cheerful, oblivious, whistling as he tied his tie. The normalcy was a knife twist. Big day today, he said, pecking me on the cheek. The kiss felt like a lie. Lunch with the team, then catching up on all those emails from Charlotte. The word hung in the air between us, charged and poisonous. I just nodded, my voice trapped in my throat. Was the lunch with the team? Or was it with her? Was he going to message her the moment he left this house, using that new password to lock me out of their world? I watched his car pull out of the driveway, and the moment it turned the corner, the performance ended. The silence in the house was deafening, and all it contained was the echoing, screaming question of what he had done. The silence after he left was a physical presence, thick and heavy in the sunlit kitchen. I stood there, clutching my cooling coffee mug, the cheerful morning news chatter from the television, a stark, mocking contrast to the turmoil inside me. The password. It was the key. It was the one thing standing between me and the truth, a truth I was now equally desperate to know and terrified to see. I couldn't function, couldn't breathe, couldn't think about loan-to-value ratios or adjustable-rate mortgages until I knew. My professional mind, trained to solve puzzles and find discrepancies, kicked into a grim, determined gear. If it wasn't our anniversaries or our birthdays, what was it? I methodically began trying every significant number I could think of. The date of his father's death. Incorrect. The number of his first car. Incorrect. The street number of his childhood home. Incorrect. With each failed attempt, a 5-minute lockout timer appeared on the screen, a digital chastisement for my snooping. I felt a rising panic, a sense of hopelessness. He had chosen something entirely new, something that had nothing to do with me, with us. Our shared history was erased from his digital identity. I put the phone down, my hands trembling, and forced myself to breathe. To think like him. What was important to him now? My eyes scanned the living room, looking for a clue, anything. They landed on a stack of mail on the counter. On top was a glossy brochure for a luxury car dealership. He'd been talking about getting a new sports car for months. A midlife crisis mobile, he'd joked. I'd laughed it off. But he'd been spending hours online, configuring models, obsessing over engine specs and horsepower. The model number. He'd mentioned it just the other day, his eyes alight with a passion I hadn't seen directed at me in months. The Porsche 911 Carrera 4s. 911. Was it that simple? That blatant? A number representing a new fantasy, a new identity, one that didn't include a mortgage processor wife and a suburban home. I picked up the phone. The screen was dark. This was my last idea. I typed in 911, the phone didn't unlock. My heart sank. Then I remembered. He always used a 4-digit code. 911 was only 3. I added a 0, my thumb hovering over the screen. 92160. I pressed enter. The home screen blossomed into view. For a moment, I couldn't move. I just stared at the grid of familiar apps against a photo of us from a beach vacation years ago. The hypocrisy of it was breathtaking. My access was granted by the symbol of his escape. I felt nauseous. Now that I was in, the enormity of what I was about to do paralyzed me. This was the point of no return. Once I looked, I could never unsee it. The life I knew would be officially over. I took a deep, shuddering breath, my finger hovering over his messaging app. This was it. The truth was literally in my hands. I opened it. The messaging app icon seemed to pulse under my thumb, a tiny green portal to hell. I tapped it. The list of conversations loaded, his mom, his brother, a group chat for his fantasy football league. All normal. My own name was at the top, our last exchange, a mundane series of texts about what to get from the grocery store. The banality of it was a special kind of cruelty. I kept scrolling, my heart hammering against my ribs. And then I saw it. A name I didn't recognize. Chloe, no last name. Just Chloe. The preview of the last message from her made the air leave my lungs. Can't stop thinking about last week. When can I see you again? Last week, the conference. I clicked on the thread. The world narrowed to the glow of the screen in my dim kitchen. The messages went back months, starting innocently enough, work questions, logistics for projects. But the tone shifted subtly after the first in-person meeting he'd failed to properly mention. It became peppered with inside jokes I didn't get, complaints about other coworkers that bonded them, a shared sense of humor that excluded everyone else, especially me. Then came the Charlotte messages. They were a blow-by-blow account of the affair I had only smelled on a shirt and seen on a coffee receipt. Conference is boring without you here to laugh at the speakers with, he'd written the first night. A lie. He'd told me the opening dinner was productive. This hotel bar is dead. Wish you were here for a drink, she'd replied. He'd written back immediately. I could be convinced to come down. Room 427. There was a 2-hour gap. Then, a message from her at 1040 a.m. I'm still buzzing. That was incredible. His response, sent minutes later. You're incredible. I haven't felt like this in years. I read each word, each digital confession, and felt my own reality disintegrate. Here was my husband, the man who fell asleep on the couch by 9, orchestrating a secret rendezvous. Here he was, telling another woman she was incredible, using the same phrase he'd used when I'd gotten that promotion last year. The betrayal was so precise, so detailed. They'd made plans to meet again, using a vague client lunch as his cover for next Thursday. He'd sent her a winking emoji. He never used emojis with me. He said they were juvenile. I saw a photo he'd sent. A selfie of them at that coffee shop, the Daily Grind, smiling over their coffees and the damned lemon loaf. They looked like a real couple. Happy, in love. I dropped the phone on the counter like it had burned me. The clatter was obscenely loud in the silent house. I backed away, my hand over my mouth, staring at it as if it were a venomous snake. The evidence was no longer a faint scent or a piece of paper. It was his own words, his own smile, captured forever. The cold, hard truth was now a thing I could hold, and it was infinitely heavier than I ever could have imagined. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. The shock was too absolute, a glacial wave that froze me from the inside out. I simply stood there in the middle of my kitchen, a statue of a woman whose life had just been vaporized by a 5-inch screen. My eyes were fixed on a crumb on the countertop, a tiny piece of toast from this morning's breakfast, a relic from a time when I was still ignorant. The mundane detail was an anchor in a reality that had suddenly become surreal, a nightmare painted in the cheerful morning light flooding the room. I could hear the clock ticking on the wall, each second a measured beat in the new, hollow silence of my existence. My body moved on its own, a puppet with its strings cut. I walked to the sink and poured the rest of my coffee down the drain, watching the dark liquid swirl and disappear. The action felt profoundly symbolic. I was pouring us away, our shared mornings, our routine, the illusion of everything we were. I had to know more. I had to see her. This Chloe was no longer just a name in a text thread. She was a real person who had sat across from my husband, eating lemon loaf, laughing at his jokes, sharing a bed in a hotel room while I thought he was listening to a keynote speech. A morbid, crushing curiosity overpowered the pain. I picked up the phone again, my hands steady now, possessed by a detached, investigative calm. I went to her contact information. Nothing. No last name, no photo. Just Chloe. I opened his work email next, my access now total. I searched her name. Dozens of threads appeared, all professional, all bland. But then I saw it, an email about the conference itinerary. It was sent to a distribution list. I scanned the names. And there she was, Chloe Williamson. A last name. A key. A few clicks later, I was on the company directory. Her profile loaded. Her picture smiled back at me. She was young, pretty in a generic way, with bright eyes and blonde hair. She was a marketing associate based in the Raleigh office. Her employee profile listed her work extensions. I committed it all to memory. Her name, her face, her office location. It was like studying the blueprints of my own destruction. A plan, cold and sharp, began to form in the icy stillness of my mind. I couldn't confront him. Not yet. He would lie, he would gaslight, he would twist it all into something I was misunderstanding. He had already built this secret life, he was prepared to defend it. But her? I wasn't sure. The texts made her seem invested, perhaps even believing his lies about our marriage. I needed to see her. I needed to look her in the eye. Thursday. He had a client lunch with her on Thursday. I knew the restaurant he always used for important clients, an upscale steakhouse near his office. Was that where he would take her? The audacity of it, using a place I knew so well. I opened my calendar app on my own phone. I cleared my schedule for Thursday. I would be there. I wouldn't say a word. I would just be a ghost at their feast, a witness to my own betrayal. The shock was finally melting, and in its place, a silent, terrifying resolve was taking root. The next 2 days were a performance of such exquisite normalcy that I felt I deserved an award. I went to work, processed loans, attended a pointless webinar on new compliance regulations, and smiled at my colleagues. I came home, made dinner, asked David about his day, and listened to his lies with a placid, interested expression. I was a shell, a ghost going through the motions of a life that no longer belonged to me. Every laugh, every casual touch from him felt like a violation, a lie layered upon the foundational lie I now carried inside me. I was living in a house of cards, and I was the only one who knew a hurricane was coming. Thursday arrived, cloudy and oppressively still. I called in sick to work, my voice a convincing rasp of feigned illness. David had already left, giving me a perfunctory kiss on the forehead, telling me to feel better. He was dressed more carefully than usual, a crisp new shirt I hadn't ironed. I watched from the window as he got into his car, no doubt feeling clever, anticipating his day of deceit. I gave him a 20-minute head start. Then I got dressed, not in my usual comfortable clothes, but in a dark, nondescript sweater and jeans, an outfit for hiding in plain sight. I grabbed my large sunglasses, a pathetic disguise that somehow made me feel more anonymous. The drive to the steakhouse was a blur. My hands were clenched on the steering wheel, my knuckles white. I found a parking spot with a direct view of the restaurant's entrance, but far enough away to be inconspicuous. I killed the engine. The silence in the car was deafening, filled only by the frantic drumming of my own heart. I checked the time. 12:05 p.m. His reservation was for noon. I waited. Every car that pulled up, every person who walked toward the doors, made my breath catch. And then, at 12:10, our car pulled into the valet line. My stomach dropped. He got out, smiling, and walked around to the passenger side. He opened the door for her. Chloe, in person. She was taller than I'd imagined from her photo, dressed in a bright blue dress that seemed too loud, too try-hard for a business lunch. She laughed at something he said, tossing her hair. He put his hand on the small of her back to guide her toward the door, a gesture that was once reserved for me in crowded rooms. The intimacy of it, the casual ownership in that touch, was a physical blow. I sat there, frozen, watching them disappear into the dim interior of the restaurant. I had my proof, irrefutable and brutal in its clarity. This was no business meeting. This was a date. He was romancing her with the same gestures, the same restaurants he had once used on me. I don't know how long I sat there. Time became meaningless. The clouds thickened overhead, threatening rain. I watched the door, a part of me morbidly waiting for them to emerge, but another part, the part that was still a rational human being, knew I had seen enough. I had crossed some invisible line from a wife with a suspicion to a private investigator, a spy on her own life. I started the car, my movements robotic. As I pulled out of the parking lot, the first heavy drops of rain began to fall, streaking down the windshield like tears. I drove home in a trance. The image of his hand on her back burned onto the back of my eyelids. The house was empty and silent when I returned. I went straight to the kitchen cabinet and took out my favorite plate, a beautiful hand-painted piece we bought on a trip to Mexico years ago. I held it in my hands, feeling its weight, its smoothness, and then I let it go. It hit the tiled floor and exploded into 100 pieces, a shockingly loud, satisfying explosion of ceramic and color. I stared at the shattered pieces. It was the first real, honest sound that had been made in this house in weeks. The sound of the shattering plate echoed through the empty house, a violent, final punctuation to the silent movie of my life. I stood there, breathing heavily, staring at the colorful fragments scattered across the pale tile. The initial burst of catharsis was immediately followed by a cold wave of panic. What if he came home early? What excuse could I possibly give? The dog? We didn't have a dog. A clumsy moment? I was never clumsy. The evidence of my breakdown was literal, lying at my feet. I couldn't leave it there. It felt too revealing, too vulnerable. I moved on autopilot, the mortgage processor in me taking over, needing to clean up the mess, to restore order to the chaos. I fetched the dustpan and brush from the closet, my movements brisk and efficient. I got down on my knees, the cold tile seeping through my jeans. I began to sweep the larger pieces into a pile, the clinking of ceramic the only sound. It was a mindless, meditative task, and my thoughts began to churn again, no longer frozen by shock but simmering with a new, more dangerous emotion, a calculated anger. As I carefully picked up a sharp, curved piece painted with a cobalt blue flower, a memory surfaced, unbidden and cruel. It was from our 10th anniversary. We'd gone back to that little coastal town in Mexico, the one where we bought the plate. We'd had dinner on the beach, our feet in the sand, and he'd held my hand and said, 10 years, Amelia. And it feels like we're just getting started. He'd seemed so sincere, his eyes soft in the lantern light. I had believed him utterly. Now, holding this shattered piece of that memory, the words felt like a script he'd rehearsed. Had he already been thinking of her then? Was he comparing my laugh to hers, my conversation to hers, even as he pretended to be present with me? I swept the shards into the dustpan and dumped them into the trash can. But one piece, the blue flower fragment, I couldn't bring myself to throw away. I held it in my palm, its edges sharp and precise. It was a piece of our past, now broken and dangerous to hold. It was a perfect metaphor. I tucked it into the pocket of my jeans, a strange, painful talisman. The physical cleanup was done, the kitchen spotless once more. But the emotional mess was only growing, spreading out from this room to fill every corner of the house. I needed air. I needed to get out of this perfect, suffocating cage. I grabbed my purse and my keys, not knowing where I was going, just knowing I had to move. I drove aimlessly for a while, eventually finding myself in the parking lot of a vast, anonymous supermarket. I wandered the brightly lit aisles, pushing a cart I didn't need, past towers of canned soup and pyramids of apples. I was surrounded by people, by life, but I felt completely alone, adrift in a sea of normalcy I could no longer access. I ended up in the frozen food section, staring blankly at a glass door covered in frost, my own pale reflection staring back. The cold air washing over me felt appropriate. I was frozen inside too. I had seen the truth. I had confirmed it with my own eyes, and now I was trapped in this awful, silent knowledge with no idea what to do next. The simple act of choosing a microwave dinner felt like an impossible decision. How was I supposed to choose a future when my past had been a lie? I drove home from the supermarket with a single frozen lasagna, a pathetic trophy from my excursion into the land of the living. The house was still empty, a monument to silence. I put the lasagna in the freezer, next to the frozen peas and the tub of ice cream we were supposed to share on movie nights. The normalcy of it was a sick joke. I walked through each room, my footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors. I saw our life together curated on the wall's vacation photos, our wedding portrait, a framed piece of art we bought at a street fair. Every object felt like a prop, every memory now suspect. Was he thinking of her when we picked out that painting? Was he comparing my smile to hers in that photo from Hawaii? The calculated anger that had begun to simmer as I swept up the plate was now a low, steady boil. The initial, paralyzing grief was being burned away by it, leaving behind a cold, clear resolve. I was not going to be a victim in this story. I was not going to wait for him to decide when and how our marriage would end. I was going to arm myself. Knowledge was power, and I needed more of it. I went into our home office, the room where I'd found the receipt. This time, I wasn't a hesitant snoop. I was an investigator. I sat down at his desk, booted up his computer. He'd gotten sloppy, complacent in his deception, never imagining I'd breach his digital fortress. His password for everything was now the same, 91110. The Porsche code, the symbol of his escape. I accessed his email again, but this time I went deeper. I searched for airline websites, for hotel confirmations. I found a deleted folder and restored it. And there it was, a confirmation for a weekend trip to Asheville next month. A romantic boutique hotel, the Grand Bohemian. The reservation was for two. It was booked under his name and guest. He'd used his personal credit card, the one we used for household expenses. Our joint money was funding his affair. I took a screenshot, emailing it to myself and then deleting the sent message from his account. I checked our shared credit card statement online. There were charges I'd glossed over before, a fancy dinner in Charlotte during his conference, a charge from a jewelry store a few weeks ago. A pit formed in my stomach. Jewelry? For her? I'd gotten a new food processor for my birthday. I documented everything, saving the statements as PDFs in a hidden folder on my own cloud drive. I felt like a ghost haunting my own life, meticulously gathering the evidence of my own death. I heard the garage door open. My heart leapt into my throat, a primal spike of fear. I quickly closed all the tabs, shut down the computer, and was out of the office and standing in the kitchen, pretending to read a recipe on my phone by the time he walked in. He looked relaxed, happy, his cheeks slightly flushed from what I could only assume was a good lunch and good company. "Feeling better?" he asked, dropping his keys on the counter. His voice was light, carefree. He had no idea that the woman standing in front of him was no longer his wife, but an archivist of his betrayal. I looked up and gave him the performance of my life. "A little," I said, my voice a perfect imitation of weak recovery. "Just tired." He nodded, believing it utterly, and went to change out of his date clothes. I stood in the kitchen, my heart hammering against my ribs, the recipe on my phone a meaningless blur. The game had changed. I was no longer just a betrayed wife. I was now his enemy, and he didn't even know we were at war. The performance that evening was the most draining yet. I moved through the motions of dinner, microwaving the lasagna, setting the table, making small talk with a sense of profound dissociation. I was watching myself from a great distance, admiring the flawless performance of the woman who knew nothing. David was in a conspicuously good mood, humming as he scrolled through his phone, occasionally smiling at some private thought. Each smile felt like a needle prick. I knew the source of that joy now. It was coded in hotel confirmations and jewelry receipts. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the lasagna at the wall. Instead, I asked him if he wanted more garlic bread. After dinner, he retreated to the living room to watch a game, and I cleaned the kitchen with a frantic, focused energy. I needed an outlet. The silent, secret war I was waging required a strength I wasn't sure I possessed. The calculated anger needed a physical release, or it would consume me from the inside. My eyes landed on my old fitness mat, rolled up and forgotten in a corner of the pantry. I'd bought it during a brief health kick years ago. I unrolled it onto the living room floor, right in front of the television. David looked over, surprised. "What's this?" "I need to do something," I said, my voice tight. "I've been feeling so sluggish lately." It wasn't a lie. I had been feeling sluggish from the weight of his betrayal. I found a high-intensity workout video on my laptop, something full of aggressive jumps and powerful punches. I turned the volume up. The perky and possibly energetic instructor filled the room. "Come on, let's go. Push through the burn." David shrugged, mildly amused, and turned his attention back to the game. And then, I began. I threw myself into the movements with a savage intensity I didn't know I had. Every jump squat was fueled by the image of him opening the car door for her. Every punching combination was thrown at the memory of his hand on the small of her back. I pushed my body harder than I ever had, my muscles screaming in protest, my lungs burning. Sweat poured down my face and back, mixing with the tears I was finally, physically able to shed without making a sound. The grunts of effort from the video instructor masked my own choked sobs. I was a whirlwind of contained fury and excruciating pain, disguised as a woman trying to get in shape. David glanced over a few times, a slightly bewildered look on his face. "You're really going for it," he commented during a commercial break. I didn't stop. I couldn't. If I stopped, I would shatter into a million pieces. The physical pain was a welcome distraction from the emotional hemorrhage. With every burning muscle, I was reclaiming a tiny piece of myself from the wreckage. I wasn't his victim in that moment. I was a warrior training for a battle only I knew was coming. By the time the cool-down segment began, I was lying on the mat, drenched, gasping for air, my entire body trembling with exhaustion. But the numb, frozen feeling was gone. It had been burned away in the fire of exertion. I felt raw, scraped clean, and terrifyingly alive. I had found my battlefield. It was my own body. The next morning, every muscle in my body screamed in protest. The simple act of getting out of bed was a monumental effort. Each ache, each sharp twinge in my core and thighs, was a grim reminder of the previous night's catharsis. It was a good pain, a honest pain. It was mine, a physical testament to my private war, unlike the silent, psychological shrapnel he had embedded in me. I welcomed it. As I limped to the shower, I caught a glimpse of myself in the bathroom mirror. My eyes were shadowed with exhaustion, but there was a new glint in them, a hard, flinty resolve that hadn't been there before. The workout hadn't just been about release, it had been a spark. The mindless, frantic energy had burned away, leaving behind a crystal-clear sense of purpose. I couldn't just be angry. I couldn't just be a victim gathering evidence. I had to build something new. If my life with David was a collapsing building, I needed to secure my own foundation before the whole thing came down on top of me. I needed a plan, not just for confrontation, but for survival. The mortgage processor in me, the woman who assessed risk for a living, kicked into high gear. I needed to understand my financial battlefield. I spent my lunch break at work doing something I'd never done before. I closed my office door and I Googled divorce lawyers in North Carolina. The words felt alien and terrifying to type. I read about equitable distribution, about separation agreements, about the importance of financial disclosure. My heart pounded as I scanned the websites of stern-looking firms, their promises of aggressive representation and protecting your assets, feeling both intimidating and deeply necessary. I didn't call anyone. Not yet. But I bookmarked 3 pages. It was a start. Next, I quietly logged into our joint bank accounts, our savings, our retirement portfolios. I took screenshots of everything, documenting every dollar, every investment. This was no longer about proving his infidelity. This was about understanding what a life without him would look like. The numbers were sobering. Our lives were deeply financially entwined. Untangling them would be a monstrous task. A wave of despair threatened to pull me under. How could I possibly do this? I took a deep breath and looked at the post-it note on my desk, where I'd scrawled the name Chloe Williamson. I looked at the sharp ceramic shard I'd placed in my pencil holder, its blue flower a tiny beacon of brokenness. I could do this because I had to. I had no other choice. He had taken my past and present, but I would be damned if I let him carelessly destroy my future. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but it was now accompanied by something else, a fierce, protective instinct for the woman I was going to have to become. The following Saturday, David announced he was going golfing with clients. The lie was so smooth, so effortless, it barely even registered as a tremor on my new emotional seismograph. I simply nodded, offering a bland, "have fun," before turning back to the coffee I was grinding. The smell, once a comforting morning ritual, now just smelled like bitterness. I heard his car back out of the driveway, and the silence that settled over the house was no longer oppressive. It was spacious. It was mine. I had 3 hours, maybe 4. It was time to move from digital reconnaissance to physical action. I went upstairs to our shared walk-in closet. It was a space that had always symbolized our union. His suits hanging next to my dresses, his shoes lined up beneath my heels. Now, it felt like an archive of a dissolved partnership. I wasn't there to smell his collars for perfume or search his pockets for receipts. I was there for something far more mundane and far more important: documentation. I started with his filing cabinet in the corner, the one that held the physical artifacts of our life together. I pulled out the heavy folders, their labels written in my own neat handwriting: tax returns, home mortgage, vehicle titles, insurance policies. I carried them to the bed and began a methodical, dispassionate review. I wasn't his wife anymore in that moment. I was an auditor. I photographed every page that mattered: the deed to the house, the loan documents for his car, our life insurance policies. The flash of my phone camera illuminated our shared financial history, one page at a time. Each click felt like I was taking a piece of our life back under my control. Next, I opened the large fireproof lockbox where we kept our vital records. The key was on his key ring, but the code was our anniversary, a security measure he and his arrogant complacency hadn't changed. I lifted the lid. Our passports, our birth certificates, our social security cards, the title to the house. I laid them all out on the floral duvet, this intimate inventory of a life built together. I photographed each one. I held my passport, the photo of a younger, brighter-eyed Amelia staring back, full of a trust I could no longer afford. I took a picture of that, too, a before and after in a single frame. Once every document was digitally captured and safely uploaded to my secret cloud folder, I carefully returned everything to its precise place. I smoothed the duvet, closed the lockbox, slid the files back into the cabinet. I left no trace of my presence there, no sign that the archivist of our demise had been through. Standing in the doorway, I took one last look at the closet. It no longer felt like our space. It felt like a storage facility for a life that was ending. I had what I needed. I had the blueprint of our financial union, and now I held a copy. The balance of power had shifted, infinitesimally, but irrevocably. He still thought he was playing golf. He had no idea I was on the verge of calling his bluff. The sterile, organized evidence on my screen and the neatly filed documents on my bed were one thing. They were facts, figures, a clinical outline of the disaster. But my heart, my foolish, stubborn heart, was still clinging to the ghost of the man I thought I'd married. It demanded one more piece of proof, something so irrefutable that it would finally completely silence the last whispers of hope that this was all some terrible misunderstanding. I needed to see them again. Not at a discreet business lunch, but in a moment of unguarded intimacy. I needed to kill the ghost. I knew where they would be. Thursday night was his late night at the office, or so he claimed. It was the perfect cover. My digital sleuthing had uncovered a pattern: small charges on his credit card at a quiet, upscale wine bar called The Cellar, on the other side of town, always on Thursday evenings. The charges were always for 2 glasses of expensive wine. He was a creature of habit, even in his deceit. That Thursday, the calculated anger was a steady drumbeat in my veins. I told him I had a book club meeting, a lie that fell from my lips as easily as his golfing lie had from his. I drove to the cellar, my hand steady on the wheel. I parked down the street, in the shadows between streetlights. The bar was nestled in a row of quaint shops, its windows glowing with a warm amber light. It looked cozy, romantic, the kind of place he would have taken me years ago. I didn't have to wait long. They arrived together, his car pulling up right out front. He was laughing, his head thrown back in a way I hadn't seen in years. She was clinging to his arm, looking up at him with adoring eyes. They looked like a couple in love. A real one. They disappeared inside. I sat in the dark car, my breath fogging the window. This was it. The final nail. I should have left then. I had what I came for. But a morbid, masochistic curiosity rooted me to the spot. I needed to see how it ended. I waited for an hour, watching the silhouettes in the window, imagining their conversation, their laughter. Finally, they emerged. The air had turned chilly, and she shivered dramatically. Immediately, he shrugged off his jacket, the same blue shirt I'd smelled the perfume on, and draped it over her shoulders. The gesture was so instinctively protective, so husbandly, that it stole the air from my lungs. He'd done that for me, 1,000 times. He pulled her close, his arm around her, and they walked to his car. He opened the passenger door for her, and before she got in, she stood on her toes and kissed him. It wasn't a quick, discreet peck. It was a long, deep, meaningful kiss, right there on the street, under the soft glow of the street lamp. I watched them drive away, the taillights disappearing into the night. The ghost was dead. There were no more whispers, no more doubts. There was only the cold, vast emptiness of certainty. I started the car and drove home, the road blurry through unshed tears that were not of sadness, but of finality. The performance was almost over. The audience was about to see the real show. The house was dark and silent when I returned, a perfect echo of the void now living inside my chest. I moved through the rooms without turning on the lights, guided by memory and the faint glow from the streetlights filtering through the blinds. The image of that kiss played on a relentless loop behind my eyes, a private horror movie I couldn't shut off. I ended up in the kitchen, my hands braced on the cold granite of the island, head bowed as I finally let the tears come. Silent, wrenching sobs that held no sound, just a violent tremor that ran through my entire body. This was the epicenter of the earthquake. This was where the plates of my life had finally finished shifting, leaving everything in ruins. I cried for the ghost of the man I thought I'd married. I cried for the 11 years that now felt like a beautifully illustrated fiction. I cried for the future we had planned, the trips we would take, the gentle aging into old age together, all of it, ash. The grief was a physical thing, a heavy, dark wave that threatened to pull me under and never let me go. I allowed it to wash over me, because I knew I had to feel it all, every last agonizing ounce of it, if I ever wanted to surface again. When the storm finally passed, I felt hollowed out, scraped clean. I pushed myself upright and went to the sink, splashing cold water on my face. The woman in the window's reflection was pale, her eyes red-rimmed and haunted, but they were clear. There was a strange, unsettling calm in the aftermath. The hope was gone. The uncertainty was gone. All that was left was the stark, unchanging truth. There was no going back. There was only forward, through the wreckage. I knew what I had to do next. I couldn't hold this alone anymore. The secret was a poison, and I needed to dilute it, to share its burden before it killed me from the inside out. I picked up my phone, my fingers trembling only slightly. I didn't call my mother, she would only worry and tell me to pray. I didn't call my friend from book club. This was too raw, too humiliating. I scrolled to the one person I knew would listen without immediate judgment, who would offer logic before hysteria. My older sister, Clara, who lived 3 states away and had never particularly liked David. I typed the words, my thumbs moving slowly, deliberately over the screen. Clara, I need to talk. It's about David. It's bad. I hesitated, then added the 3 words that would convey the gravity without detail. He's having an affair. I pressed send. The message whooshed away, carrying my secret out into the world. It was no longer mine alone to carry. I placed the phone on the counter and waited, the silence in the house feeling different now, not empty, but expectant. I had just called for a lifeline. I just had to hope one would be thrown back. The 3 blinking dots appeared on my screen almost instantly. Clara was typing. A lifetime seemed to pass in those seconds, the pixels dancing, forming words I was desperately hoping for and yet dreading to see. My breath hitched. Then her response came, not in text, but as an incoming video call. The ringtone was jarringly loud in the silent kitchen, a shrill announcement of my crisis. I fumbled to accept it, my finger smudging the screen. Her face filled the display, pixelated for a second before sharpening. She was in her home office, her reading glasses pushed up on her head, her expression already etched with a fierce, protective concern that made my throat tighten. She didn't say hello, tell me everything, she said, her voice low and steady, an anchor in my churning sea. And I did. The words tumbled out of me in a rushed, fractured whisper, as if David might hear me from the golf course. I told her about the perfume on the shirt, the coffee receipt, the changed password. I described the texts, the photo from the coffee shop, the hotel booking in Asheville. I told her about the wine bar, about the kiss under the street lamp. I held nothing back. It was a purge, a vomiting forth of all the poison I'd been forced to swallow alone for weeks. Clara listened. She didn't interrupt, didn't gasp, didn't offer empty platitudes. She just listened, her face growing harder, her lips pressed into a thin, angry line. When I finally finished, breathless and empty, there was a long silence. She took off her glasses and pinched the bridge of her nose. "That stupid, selfish son of a bitch," she finally said, her voice dripping with a cold, pure venom that was more comforting than any sympathy could have been. I knew it. I always knew there was something slick about him. Her immediate, unwavering belief was a balm. I hadn't realized how terrified I was of not being believed, of being told I was overreacting, until the fear was gone. "What am I going to do, Clara?" The question was a plea, the voice of the lost woman I had been just an hour ago. "What are we going to do?" she corrected firmly. "First, you save every piece of evidence you have. Every screenshot, every photo, every document. You send copies to me right now. Second, you do not say a word to him. Not one word. You let him think he's getting away with it. You be sweet and stupid and quiet. Can you do that?" I nodded, fresh tears welling, but these were of relief. "I wasn't alone. Good," she said. "We're going to get you through this. Now, show me the pictures of the texts." And just like that, the war was no longer mine alone. I had a general. Clara's presence, even through a screen, was a fortress around my crumbling world. After the call ended, a strange, new energy coursed through me, replacing the paralyzing grief with a sharp, focused purpose. Her instructions were clear: gather, secure, and play dumb. I could do that. I was, after all, a mortgage processor. Meticulous documentation was my profession. Betrayal had just become my new case file. I spent the rest of the evening executing Clara's orders with a cold efficiency that would have scared me weeks ago. I created a new, encrypted email account with a name he would never guess. One by one, I began forwarding the evidence: the screenshots of texts, the hotel confirmation, the credit card statements, the photos of the documents from our lockbox. Each click of the send button felt like launching a weapon. I emailed everything to Clara and to my new secret account, building a digital arsenal far away from any device he could access. The most incriminating piece, the video from the home security camera of him leaving for his fake golf game, was the crown jewel. I downloaded the clip, his cheerful whistle as he walked out the door, a stark contrast to the truth I now held. Sending it felt like the point of no return. This was no longer just about me knowing, it was about creating an immutable, off-site record that he could never destroy. I was no longer just protecting myself. I was building a case. As I worked, a plan began to form in my mind, shaped by Clara's strategic coldness. Confronting him in a blaze of tears and accusations would only give him the upper hand. He could lie, manipulate, turn it around on me. He could play the wounded party, claim I was paranoid. I couldn't give him that chance. The confrontation, when it came, couldn't be emotional. It had to be a presentation of facts, so overwhelming and undeniable that his lies would have nowhere to land. I wouldn't scream, I wouldn't cry, I would state, I would show, and I would watch him crumble. He came home later, smelling of fresh air and, faintly, of beer. The charade of his golf game was perfect. "How was book club?" he asked, hanging his keys on the hook by the door. The normalcy of the question was breathtaking in its hypocrisy. I looked up from my book, my face a placid mask. "It was good," I said, my voice even. We decided on our next read. A mystery. I almost smiled at the private irony. How was golf? The usual. Missed a few easy puts. The guys say hi. He walked into the kitchen and opened the refrigerator, his back to me. He was so comfortable in his deceit, so sure of his control over the narrative. I watched him, this stranger I had shared a bed with for 11 years, and felt nothing but a chilling calm. The storm of emotion had passed. All that was left was the quiet before the execution. He thought he was the puppeteer. He had no idea the strings had been cut, and the puppet was now holding the scissors. The next week was an exercise in surrealism. I moved through my life as Amelia, the betrayed wife, But inside, I was someone else entirely, a strategist, a spy in my own home. Clara was my lifeline, my command center. Our texts, hidden behind a calculator app vault, were a constant stream of planning and support. "Did he say anything about working late Thursday?" she'd ask. "Sent you the contact for the lawyer my friend used." She's a shark. Her presence was a steady drumbeat of resolve in my ear. The lawyer's name was Eleanor Vance. I looked her up. Her firm's website promised discreet and decisive representation for complex marital dissolutions. Her photo showed a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense smile. She looked like someone who could dismantle a life with the calm efficiency of a surgeon. Just looking at her picture made my hands go cold and clammy. Contacting her made it real in a way that gathering evidence did not. It was the official start of the end. I used my lunch break at work, hiding in my car in the parking lot for privacy. My heart hammered against my ribs as I listened to the phone ring. A crisp, professional voice answered. "Law offices of Vance and Associates." "Hi," I said, my voice unnaturally high. I cleared my throat, forcing it lower, forcing the mortgage processor professionalism to the forefront. "I'd like to schedule a consultation with Eleanor Vance, please. Regarding a divorce." There was a clicking of keys. "And is this regarding a potential new matter?" Yes, the word was final. It hung in the air of my car, heavy and absolute. I was transferred to a paralegal and we went through the basics. I gave her my name, my contact information. I told her my husband's name. Saying David in that context to a stranger in a law office made my stomach lurch. We scheduled a meeting for the following Monday afternoon. I claimed a doctor's appointment on my work calendar. The lies were stacking up, a precarious tower of deception mirroring his own. When I hung up, I sat in the silence of my car, the only sound the hum of a distant lawnmower. I had done it. I had officially enlisted a mercenary in my war. There was no turning back. The path was set. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. The woman staring back was pale, but her eyes were dry. She looked scared, but she also looked determined. She had just declared war, and the first shot hadn't even been fired yet. I started the car and drove back to the office, to my desk, to my spreadsheets. The world hadn't ended. It had just become a lot more complicated. The weekend was a void. I existed in a state of suspended animation, performing the rituals of domesticity with a robotic detachment. David, emboldened by his own successful deceptions, was almost jovial, planning a barbecue for the following month, talking about a summer vacation we would never take. Each word was a small, fresh cut. I nodded and smiled, the perfect, oblivious wife, all the while counting down the hours until my doctor's appointment. Monday afternoon arrived, heavy with impending rain. I told David I was getting a mole checked, a lie so bland and medical it was beyond questioning. The law offices of Vance and Associates were in a sleek, modern building downtown, all glass and steel. It felt like entering a different world, a world of cold, hard facts where emotion was a liability. The reception area was quiet, hushed, the air smelling of lemon polish and expensive perfume. I gave my name to the receptionist, my voice barely a whisper. "Eleanor will be right with you," she said with a professional smile. I sat on the edge of a deep leather sofa, my hands clasped tightly in my lap to stop their trembling. I felt like an imposter, a little girl playing dress-up in the midst of serious adult catastrophe. A door opened. "Amelia?" "I'm Eleanor Vance." The woman from the website was taller in person, her handshake firm and dry. She led me into an office with a breathtaking view of the city. The rain had started, streaking the glass walls in long gray tears. I sat in the chair opposite her monumental desk, feeling small. "Thank you for coming," she began, her tone not warm, but not unkind. "Efficient." My paralegal gave me the broad strokes. "Why don't you start from the beginning and tell me what's brought you here today?" And so, I did. For the second time, I laid out the entire sordid story. It was easier this time, more clinical. I was presenting a case. I handed over the folder I'd brought, containing printouts of the most damning evidence, the text thread, the hotel booking, the credit card charges. She leafed through them slowly, her expression unchanging. She didn't flinch at the kiss photo. She didn't gasp at the hotel confirmation. She simply took notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, she set her pen down precisely. "You've been very thorough, Amelia. This is a significant amount of evidence of marital misconduct." She steepled her fingers. "North Carolina is a state that requires a year of separation before divorce, but his adultery is grounds for post-separation support and can impact equitable distribution. It shows a conscious disregard for the marriage." The terms were cold, legalistic, marital misconduct, equitable distribution. They reduced my heartbreak to a list of negotiable items. "What do I do?" I asked, my voice sounding small in the large, quiet room. "First, we do nothing to tip him off," she said, her eyes sharp. "You continue exactly as you are. We use this time to get our financial ducks in a row. Then, when we are ready, we have him served. Not here, at his office." The cold finality of it stole my breath. Served. At his office. It was the nuclear option. It was a public annihilation of the life he'd so carefully constructed. A small, dark part of me that I barely recognized thrilled at the thought. "This will be a process," she said, her voice pulling me back. "It will be difficult. But you are not alone in this anymore." She handed me a list of documents to gather, a checklist of our life together to be dismantled. I walked out of her office 30 minutes later into the pouring rain, clutching a retainer agreement and a list of tasks. I felt emotionally flayed, but for the first time, I had a map through the hell. I had a general, and I had a shark, and I was learning how to swim with them. Leaving Eleanor Vance's office felt like stepping out of a surgical theater. The world outside was still raining, still gray, but it felt different. I was different. The retainer agreement in my purse was more than a contract. It was a declaration of independence, its weight both terrifying and empowering. I drove home through the slick streets, the rhythmic swish of the wipers, a metronome for my churning thoughts. Served. At his office. The phrase played on a loop, a stark, clinical end to the messy, emotional chaos he had created. I found David in the living room, already home, watching the news. The normalcy of the scene was jarring. His shoes were off, his feet up on the ottoman. He looked comfortable, entitled to this space, to this life. To me, "How was the doctor?" he asked, not taking his eyes off the weather forecast. The lie came as easily as breathing now. "Fine, just a mole, nothing to worry about." I hung my wet coat in the closet, my movements deliberate and calm. I could feel his gaze on my back for a second, a flicker of scrutiny, before it returned to the television. I had passed the test. I went upstairs to change, closing the bedroom door behind me. I leaned against it, taking a deep, steadying breath. The performance was exhausting, but I could see the finish line. Eleanor's instructions were clear: gather, secure, and wait. The waiting was now the hardest part. It felt like holding a lit match next to a fuse, forced to stand perfectly still. Later that night, as David slept soundly beside me, the sleep of the guilt-free, or at least the sleep of the arrogantly unaware, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. My mind wasn't racing with panic anymore. It was coolly, calmly reviewing the plan. The documents were secured. The lawyer was retained. The evidence was overwhelming. All that was left was the timing. Eleanor would have the papers drawn up. A process server would be hired. And then the world would explode. A strange sense of clarity settled over me. This wasn't about winning him back. It wasn't even about revenge, not really. It was about reclaiming my narrative. For weeks, he had written the story of our demise, casting me as the oblivious fool. But I had been reading along, gathering the pen pieces. Soon it would be my turn to write the final chapter. The fear was still there, a cold stone in my gut, but it was now outweighed by a profound need for finality. I needed to hear the door slam shut. I needed to stand in the silence afterward and know, for certain, that the performance was over. I turned on my side, away from his sleeping form, and closed my eyes. For the first time in weeks, I didn't dream of betrayal. I dreamed of silence. The following days were a study in exquisite tension. I moved through the house like a bomb disposal expert, hyper-aware of every word, every gesture, every potential trigger. David, meanwhile, existed in a state of blissful ignorance, his greatest concern whether his golf swing was improving. The dissonance was deafening. I found myself studying him, the way he chewed his food, The particular sigh he made when he sat down, the mundane rhythms of a man who had no idea his life was about to be dismantled. There was a strange, painful intimacy in this silent observation, a final cataloging of a person I was about to erase from my future. My phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor's paralegal. The documents are ready. The process server is on standby. Please confirm the best time and location for service. The message was so sterile, so transactional, for something that felt so volcanic. My thumb hovered over the screen. This was it. The final button to push. I thought of him sitting at his desk, in his office, surrounded by his colleagues, his professional persona. It was the identity he prized almost as much as the one he presented to me. It was the perfect place to shatter them both. I typed back, my hands steady. His office. Tomorrow. 11 a.m. The send button felt like a detonator. I put the phone down and took a deep, shuddering breath. It was done. The machinery of divorce was now in motion, and I was no longer in control of its timeline. A strange calm settled over me. The anxiety of waiting was replaced by the certainty of impending action. I went to my secret hiding place, a locked file box in the back of my closet where I kept the physical evidence. I took out the manila folder. Inside was the printed screenshot of the text thread, the hotel confirmation, the credit card statements, and nestled on top was the sharp blue ceramic shard from the plate I'd shattered. I picked it up, its edges biting faintly into my skin. This piece of our broken past would be my talisman for what was to come. I didn't sleep that night. I lay beside him, watching the digital clock numbers change, each minute bringing me closer to the end. I wasn't planning my words anymore. There was nothing left to say that the evidence wouldn't scream for me. I was simply steeling myself for the aftermath, for the shock and the fury and the inevitable collapse of the man I had loved. When the first gray light of dawn filtered through the blinds, I got up quietly. I dressed with care, choosing an outfit of simple, dark elegance armor for the day ahead. I made coffee, my movements automatic. I heard him get up, shower, come downstairs. He was whistling. He kissed my cheek, grabbed his travel mug, and headed out the door with a casual, "See you tonight." I didn't reply. I just stood in the kitchen, holding my mug, listening to the garage door close. I looked at the clock. 8:47 a.m. 2 hours and 13 minutes until detonation. The 2 hours and 13 minutes passed with the agonizing slowness of a glacier. Each tick of the kitchen clock was a hammer strike on my nerves. I didn't try to work. I couldn't. I simply moved from room to room, a restless ghost in the home I was about to obliterate. I straightened a picture frame. I watered a plant that didn't need it. I watched the clock. My heart was a frantic bird trapped in the cage of my ribs, beating against my chest as if trying to escape the inevitable. At 10:50 a.m., my phone buzzed on the counter. A text from an unknown number. In position. The process server. My breath caught. There was no turning back now. The machinery I had set in motion was at his doorstep. I pictured the man, a stranger in a uniform holding a thick, legal envelope containing the end of my marriage. I pictured the receptionist at David's office, the confused frown, the call to his desk. "There's someone here to see you, David." I stood in the silent living room, my arms wrapped tightly around myself. The house was so quiet I could hear the hum of the refrigerator. This was the last moment of the before, the last second of the life I had known. I closed my eyes, waiting for the earthquake. My phone rang at 11:07 a.m. His name flashed on the screen. I let it ring 3 times, steeling myself. I could already hear the shock, the confusion, the anger in that first syllable. I swiped to answer and brought the phone to my ear. I didn't speak. "Amelia?" His voice was sharp, laced with a bewildered panic I had never heard before. "What is this? What is going on?" "Some guy just served me papers." "At my office? Divorce papers? What the hell is this?" I let the silence hang for a beat, allowing his confusion to curdle into dawning horror. I could hear the frantic rustle of paper, him fumbling with the documents. "Amelia, talk to me. This is some kind of mistake, right? A joke? This isn't funny." When I finally spoke, my voice was calm, flat, and colder than I knew it could be. It was Eleanor's voice. It was Clara's voice. It was my own new voice, forged in the fire of his betrayal. "It's not a mistake, David. I said it slowly, clearly. Read the filed exhibits. Page 7. The text messages from the conference. Page 12. The hotel confirmation for Asheville. Page 15. The photo from the cellar. It's all there. The silence on his end was absolute. I could imagine him, in his expensive suit, standing in the middle of his professional world, watching it crumble to dust as he scanned the evidence of his own destruction. There was a sharp, choked sound, like the air had been punched from his lungs. I can explain, he stammered, but the words were weak, pathetic. The lie died before it could even be fully born. There's nothing to explain, I said, my tone final, absolute. It's over. Don't come home. Your things will be sent to you. Any further communication can go through my lawyer, Eleanor Vance. I heard a crash, as if he'd dropped the phone or knocked something off his desk. There was a muffled sob of raw, unfiltered panic. But I didn't wait to hear more. I had heard everything I needed to hear. I ended the call. The silence in the house rushed back in, but it was a different silence now. It wasn't empty. It was full. It was mine. I placed the phone gently on the coffee table. I looked around at the walls, the furniture, the life we had built. It was over. The performance was finally, blessedly over. I walked to the kitchen, took a glass from the cupboard, and filled it with water. My hand was perfectly steady. I drank it all. Then I picked up the sharp blue piece of the shattered plate from the windowsill where I'd left it. I held it in my palm, its edges no longer feeling sharp, but simply definite. I placed it back down. It was just a piece of ceramic now. The past was over. The future, for the first time in a long time, was entirely and utterly mine.